Joining me to discuss this and plenty more this week from the US is Kosha Gada. Kosha, it's extraordinary, isn't it, when a television network has to clarify, no, we don't actually hate the country we operate in.
It really is, if you just step back and think that that is something she felt the need to say on the air. There are a lot of contradictions here, Caleb. I think you set it up perfectly, where they don't hate the country, but they do hate everything that makes up the country in terms of the foundational principles, the culture, the system. They may not hate the land, the physical land, but then they don't really believe that it's American land. A lot of them, I'm not talking about Dana Bash in particular, but a lot of them, you know, they go back to who the land belongs to and First Nations and all of that, which is sweeping around the world. And they certainly don't hate free speech. They love it, as is their right to air all sorts of people and characters, such as what you played in that mashup over there of the kinds of things that their guests and contributors say. But they have many, many instances where they have either criticized other people exercising free speech or very quick to censor and deplatform others. So lots of contradictions, but that's the world in which we live in. It does show up in the numbers. That is the big picture, whereas CNN, once the pioneer of 24/7 news, in its heyday was getting millions of viewers, and now it's down to 500,000 and sort of like a melting ice cube, where that decline continues and will for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, well, perhaps people don't want to be served up the fact that the people they're watching don't like their country. Another interesting thing this week, Mark Zuckerberg and Meta have been going through an antitrust court case this week. Here's a report that we had earlier in the week from Peter Stefanovic.
Well, Mark Zuckerberg, he's returned to court for day 2 of Meta's antitrust trial, which could lead to the parent company breaking away from Instagram and WhatsApp. The tech giant will defend claims it holds a social media monopoly, accused by Donald Trump's Trade Commission of neutralising its competitors. It's understood the Facebook founder has lobbied the US president in recent weeks to have the case dropped.
Now, Kosha, this is centred around Mark Zuckerberg's purchases of Instagram and WhatsApp and whether the company ought to be broken up. What exactly is this case about, and what's the latest?
Yes, so it is an antitrust case, and antitrust in general has been certainly gaining momentum in the past 5-6 years in the US. In this case, this is being brought by the FTC. There are similar cases being brought against Google and Amazon by state attorneys general, by the Department of Justice, by the SEC, all around that vein of antitrust, which is that alleging that they have engaged in very anti-competitive behaviors, buying up where they've got 70, 80, 90% market share in the places in which they play, and doing what they call this buy or bury strategy, where if they can't outcompete a company, they're so big that they can just acquire them and become even more powerful. And antitrust law has long been behind the 8 ball in the US, because the end benefit to the consumer, since most of these services are free, has been hard for them to prove, but finally it is something that is gaining steam. In terms of whether or not it's going to happen, it's honestly anybody's guess. There's a lot of wood to chop before we get there. It has survived. The case has survived 2 attempts from Meta to dismiss it, so it is going to trial right now, hence he's showing up in court. It's that same Judge Boasberg who's been in the news and at loggerheads with Trump right now presiding over the case, so it really is anybody's guess. I'm not sure how far they will go, but it's certainly putting them in the spotlight.
Well, how much of Zuckerberg's sucking up, you might call it, to Trump after he was elected in November do you think might be linked to this?
You know, it could be. He is worth about $200 billion because of his 13.5% stake in Meta. So yes, he would have, if a forced divestiture were to happen based on antitrust law, he would experience a dent, but not really a life-altering dent. Even if it's 10 or 20% of his net worth, he's still going to be worth north of $150 billion US dollars. So maybe that's coming into play a little bit for it. It could also be on some level, I don't want to say a genuine change of heart, but a little bit of a change of heart, where the cultural zeitgeist really has shifted from where it was so much into Trump hating and to sort of admiring him even in some ways, surviving the assassination attempt and all that. Zuckerberg has talked about that in different forums. So who knows? It's probably a mixture of different things in there. But yeah, I'm sure these people all lobby. They lobby with their wallet and they lobby with currying personal favor. And I'm sure that's part of their recipe as well.
Yeah, well, if he wants to lose a bit more money, I'll sell him some shares in some of the horses I'm in. It's a pretty good way to lose your money fast. Now, earlier this week, a jury took less than an hour to convict Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez over the murder and rape of Rachel Morin. He's an illegal immigrant. And Morin's mother, Patty, turned up to the White House during the week to address the press. And our sister station in the US, Fox News, they broadcast her address live. But MSNBC covered a Bernie Sanders rally and interviewed a journalist about it. And over at CNN, they were talking about Californian Governor Gavin Newsom and ran a segment on the NBA. Now, it's pretty standard for news channels to take press conferences in full these days. Why would they cut away when the mother of a murder and rape victim starts describing what an illegal immigrant did to her daughter?
You know, I think the only conclusion we can draw is that it doesn't fit their narrative or their product strategy or their ideology, which is all rolled into really one and the same. And their whole what that is for all of them, their entire thesis is that immigration ultimately is good. It's a net force for good, and these are just persecuted people coming into the country, and Trump and his administration are terrible for engaging the biggest deportation effort as he campaigned on. These kinds of things that humanize the victims and the human toll of illegal immigration is something that we've seen, whether it's CNN and MSNBC not covering it, whether you saw not a single Democrat in Congress at the State of the Union getting up to applaud the signing of the Laken Riley Act, Laken Riley being another American victim of illegal immigration. It just doesn't fit their narrative, and so we're going to expect to see more of that, and it goes back to the earlier point where that is leading to a dwindling base or audience of people that just want to keep eating what they're serving up rather than getting a true picture of these issues and what's going on in the country.
I talked about CNN earlier, and while we're on the topic of illegal immigrants, Trump faced off with CNN reporter Caitlin Collins this week over the deportation of an El Salvadorian man. His name's Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He's allegedly a member of a gang. So he was sent back to El Salvador, where he's now in prison, but the courts have ruled that he should be brought back to the US. Take a look at the scuffle.
Do you plan to ask President Bukele to help return the man who your administration says was mistakenly deported? The man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador?
Well, let me ask Pam, would you answer that question?
Sure, President. First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, two courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country. Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him.
Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago, and they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You know, you have no credibility.
Well, Collins then went on air and said that Trump seemed to backtrack on previous promises to obey the Supreme Court on this. What's the story here?
So here, you know, what they're doing is, in the big picture, Trump is enjoying a resounding success on the entire topic of immigration. It's what he ran on and won on twice. He's completely taken deportations to a next level scale. Border crossings are down to virtually zero, and these types of cases are being publicized, and the entire electorate, including Democrats, are with him now. That is quite a turnabout in that issue from where it was even a short time ago. In the midst of that resounding success, there are little cases here and there where they might have a little bit of a bump, or the other side gets a little bit of a win. That's what this case is. And so what Caitlin Collins and others are doing is they like to zoom into that minutia, since they have already lost on the big picture and will continue to do so. And basically what the Supreme Court ruled, this went all the way up to the Supreme Court, is that this person claimed persecution in his home country of El Salvador. And so while he could be deported, because he is an illegal in the US, he doesn't have to be deported to El Salvador, but that happened anyway. And the ruling said that the US government has to facilitate, quote, facilitate his return. That is a legal term of art. Many say the Supreme Court did it deliberately, which means that they don't have to actively retrieve him back into the country, but if he were to come back somehow, maybe they wouldn't stop it. That's kind of how the Trump administration is interpreting it. And the president of El Salvador was sitting right there, and he said he is a citizen of my country, and I'm not going to smuggle him back into the US. So it's kind of a done deal, and they just keep going to the minutia of the law while they continue to lose on the big picture and where the American public stands on this issue.